Well, it's 10 o'clock, everybody. So welcome to the VNZ fourth webinar in its webinar series. I'm Michelle Kitney, and I'm the General Manager at Volunteering New Zealand. Scott Miller, our Chief Executive, until a couple of weeks ago, has moved on to Volunteering Victoria. So I'll be your host today. Welcome to Stuart Garland, who is from Volunteer Ireland, and he is the programs manager there. He's going to speak to us today on his volunteer impact assessment tool, and then present a couple of case studies. So his tool and the training that goes with it is something that is delivered over usually the course of a day. So we'll be just having a quick overview of that tool. So if you have any questions as we go, please just pop them into the Q&A poll, and we'll probably just try and deal with those at the end. But feel free to make comments in the chat. And yeah, so just a huge welcome to Stuart, and thank you for your time, and it's a real honour to have you presenting to us today. So I'll hand it over to Stuart.
Okay, thanks a lot, Michelle, and good morning to you all. Thanks a lot for joining on our webinar today. Just, I suppose, to give you a little bit of background to myself, I've been involved with Volunteer Ireland and the Volunteer Development Agency for a number of years here in Ireland, and I suppose my experience has been trying to look at, I suppose, what we can do in terms of improving our volunteer programs. And a number of years ago, I came across the Volunteer Impact Assessment Toolkit, which is what I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about this morning, and to give you a little bit of knowledge and background into the program and how it can actually help you in your program in terms of making a difference, and being aware in terms of those impact measurements that we can use in volunteering. So I suppose just to give you a little bit of background to it, first of all, is around how did it actually come up. And about 12 years ago in the UK, Volunteering England, as it was at the time, were getting a lot of volunteer centres, and volunteer involving organisations were coming along and asking the questions in terms of how can we find out, you know, is our volunteer program good? And a lot of the volunteer involving organisations were asking questions like, do you like volunteering with us? Are we doing a good job? Can we do better? And they were all good, positive questions, but we weren't really digging down very deeply into the impact of volunteering and the difference that it was making. And quite importantly, it was important to get that message across to volunteers as well. So they approached the Institute of Volunteer and Research, which is based just outside London, to help develop a research-based tool, which they developed. It's now in its third edition, which is called the Volunteer Impact Assessment Toolkit. We've used it with about 12 different projects now ourselves directly, and indirectly we've had about six projects at this stage have used it themselves to look at their volunteer programs and see the difference that it's making. So for a lot of organizations, we make the toolkit available. If you're interested in buying a copy, you can get a copy. It is around about, I think it costs about €40. Or £35 sterling with postage anyway. But if anyone is interested, you can get a copy off ourselves or through NCVO in the UK are the people that are able to deliver that training for you. Ourselves, we, as I say, as Michelle was saying, this is a condensed version of the toolkit itself to give you a little bit of a taste of what it's about, and hopefully you get plenty of opportunity at the end to ask questions in terms of what has it meant in terms of the organisations that have used it and the difference it can make for them. So just, I suppose, to give you a little bit of background to it as well, I suppose, you know, really the whole thing looks at the assessment, looks at the impact of volunteering on volunteers in the organisation, but also on service users and on the staff, and how all those groups link together. But it links into the volunteer management cycle. So looking at all of those elements in terms of planning for volunteer involvement, looking at developing a volunteer policy within the organisation, looking at that recruitment and selection stage too as well, in terms of that piece of engagement, planning around the orientation and training of new volunteers into the organisation. Most importantly, looking at that day-to-day management piece. So making sure that we can free up enough time from the recruitment and selection process that it can be automated or made as simple as it possibly can for the volunteers to get involved with. that the orientation is smooth and transparent, but it allows us to focus onto that day-to-day management of looking on after volunteers on a day-to-day basis. Recognition, we all know, is a really important element of it, but that we learn around every time we go around. And I suppose the toolkit is based around that, is that whichever of elements we have in that one, we want to lead to look at retention. So even if we're involved in short-term episodic volunteering, that those volunteers are coming back to us. If they're long-term engaged with our programs, that they're looking on a long-term in terms of staying involved with our program. But it looks at all of those particular elements based on the questions that we ask, and it helps identify where we're doing well in those particular areas and where we might need some improvement. And then again, we encourage organizations, I suppose, to continue to use that on a yearly basis. So it might be that we would say your area for improvement this year might be around recruitment and selection, and that the organization would go away, do some work on that in year one, and then ask a series of questions the following year then in terms of seeing, has the improvement been made? So not just making changes in your program, but making those changes and going back and talking to your volunteers again to see how did they find that experience, has it improved for them in terms of the program. So just to give you a little bit about the toolkit itself and how we actually go about using it and how it works for an organization. So the whole toolkit is available, it's downloadable, and there's a whole series of questions that you can ask, and there's around about 100 questions in total. We never encourage you to ask every single one of the 100 questions, because you get a lot of data. And it can be very, very difficult to actually, I suppose, assess when you have a lot of data there in terms of what the areas you want to focus on. So we encourage organizations as much as they possibly can to spend some time to think about, what do you think are the challenges that are there for your organization, what you would like to address, and what you might want as some of those outcomes, which will help you then to ask those specific questions. Within the pack as well, there's lots of different templates that you can use in there. So for the various questionnaires, whether they be online questionnaires, focus groups, templates for case studies, and also to allow people to record the data there in terms of their volunteering. There's a number of case studies that are in the pack too as well. I'll talk to you about some of the ones we've done ourselves a little bit later on, but again, it's giving you the experience of how it's worked for an organization. And it's worked for very, very small organizations as well as big national organizations, both in Ireland and in the UK. And there's a series of other resources that are there in the pack, which make it all very useful. I suppose the pack has been developed by researchers, but trying to make it as user-friendly as possible for us volunteer managers. And that's the important element in terms of making it as easy as we can to get it to be used within the organization. So I suppose the framework that's there in terms of the toolkit is looking and asking these sort of questions is, who does volunteering make a difference to? And that's an important thing in terms of, as we all know, that volunteering is a two-way relationship, that the volunteer has to give something and the volunteer has to get something in return. But also looking at, I suppose, how are they affected? What are the effects of someone giving of their volunteering time, both on the volunteer, on the service user, on the wider organization, on the beneficiaries of the service, and possibly looking even as far as their families. So there's a series of questions that can be asked in there. You've got questionnaires for volunteers, you've got questionnaires for staff, you've got questionnaires for board members, trustees, and for the wider community. So again, the wider you go, the more helpful it will get you to focus down on the questions that we come back. So we have done some which are only with volunteers. We've done quite a few more with staff and volunteers, and that's an important thing in looking at the relationship between the paid staff and volunteers within the organisation, but also looking at the beneficiaries too as well. So let's have a look at some of the steps, and I suppose this would be for any impact assessment that you're going to be doing, but these are the steps that are there within the pack itself. Hopefully be able to read that one there. So as we say, the first thing before you start in the maroon coloured one there is thinking about the approach to focus on the difference you want to make. So thinking about the difference that you want your volunteer program to make, and by thinking and taking a little bit of time around that actually helps you to ask and focus on the right questions. There's no point in asking 100 questions where a volunteer gets down to question 20 and then they decide, no, I'm not going to answer any more of these, or they're not fitting in the comments. So having the questions defined down is a really important element. Make sure that you get the right answers in. but that you're getting good raw data that comes back to you. So thinking a little bit in terms of step one of identifying why you want to carry out that volunteering assessment. And for a lot of programs, it's about identifying what they're doing well in the program, but also identifying areas for improvement. And sometimes when you ask volunteers, they talk, yeah, it's a really good program. I enjoy my time here. But again, is within the program, it gets them to reflect a little bit more in terms of their experiences. What could you be doing better? In step two, we're looking at the scale of the assessment and the resources you'll need. So how many volunteers have you got? What do you think would be a good response rate for them? How are you going to get that message across? Is it that you can get people to fill out surveys online, or will you have to do paper ones? If you're going to do focus groups, how many, where are you going to have them? How difficult is it to get people there? So making sure it's as accessible as it possibly can, and that might mean a little bit more work for yourself. We have a survey on with one organisation at the moment who have about 2,000 volunteers, I think, and in a week they've had 1,100 responses, which is absolutely fantastic to the group already. So their engagement is really, really good. We had one about 6 or 8 weeks ago where they've had a much bigger challenge in terms of getting people to respond. So it's thinking a little bit about, you know, what response are you going to get? What are the tools that people are most likely to use? In terms of step 3, it's identifying and prioritize the groups you focus on and what you want to assess. So looking at which groups. So definitely want to focus on your volunteers, your staff members, your beneficiaries, if you've got sponsors, funders in the wider community. And a lot of the ones that we've done have gone on in a way to look at the cost of volunteering and the resources that might be needed to it, but actually to make a case for a full-time volunteer manager within a program. Then looking a little bit about the tools that we're going to use for within the assessment of how we're going to set about doing that and setting the timelines. And then we undertake the assessment and collect the raw data. The difficult one, I suppose, is step 6, and that's probably what takes the longest, is around analysing and assessing that data when you get it. So if you use an online tool such as SurveyMonkey, Timber Surveys, lots of different programs that are there online to help you to do that. But you will also have a lot of qualitative and quantitative data, and it's actually sorting through that to make sure you dig down as deep as much as you possibly can to get the information back coming in. It is then the piece around making sense of that information, and if you're from a volunteer management background, that'll be an easy enough thing to do, but to draw the conclusions in terms of making a series of recommendations. Most importantly, it's about communicating the findings of the assessment. So if you're going to go through with this as a process, we encourage organisations as much as they possibly can to let the volunteers know, let everyone know what are the outcomes, what are the next steps, what we plan to do, and getting people on board and learning from your findings and to improve your work of going, okay, well, we have a lot of steps ahead of us, we have a lot of things to do, and we'll do some of these things in year 1, we might do some of those things in year 2. So when we look a little bit deeper into impact, when we're talking about volunteer programs, we're talking about the difference that volunteering makes. So it can include some of the outcomes of volunteers' activities, so the changes, benefits, learning, or other effects that result from volunteering, but also the impact of the volunteering program, so the longer term high level changes. So if we have a look at this as an example here in terms of home visiting volunteers, this is just one of the pages out of the book, so apologies just for the quality there. So in terms of the inputs and resources, so it's the resources that are needed to operate the program, is time, a salary for a volunteer manager, advertising, recruitment materials, induction training materials, volunteer expenses, the activities, and the things you need to do that is volunteer induction and training, the home visits. The outputs are the products or services that the program or the project delivers, so the number of training sessions, number of families that are visited. And then the intermediary changes, so the benefits and other effects, so things like an increase in social contact for parents, increased access to local services for families, increased confidence and self-esteem of the volunteers, while the broader, longer-term goals might be reduced isolation, improved life chances for children, and greater awareness of volunteering. So it's about exploring each one of those and taking a little bit of time beforehand to think of your own project and how that might actually apply into it. When we dig in a little bit deeper into asking the questions within the survey, and you might say, well, I don't know which one of these, but it's into 4 broad areas. So the economic capital, the human capital, so we look at that, the social capital, and the cultural capital. So I won't go into too much detail on each of those, but I suppose it's to say that there are 4 areas of 4 sets of questions that are broadly categorized within that, which help us to then decide that we'll make sure we're asking the right information, getting the right information from the volunteers. So if you haven't heard of the various research methods that we've got, the first, I suppose, is the quantitative. So that's numerical information that we want to gather. So answering questions like, how many times do you volunteer? When do you volunteer? In the morning, the afternoon? Where do you do it? And how often does it happen? In the qualitative research, I suppose we're digging a lot more deeper, and usually that's through focus groups, or we might have open comment fields that are in the questionnaires, and that deals with information which can't be quantified. So it's going the why, the what, and the how. So why do you volunteer? What do you get out of volunteering? How do you get there? What is the engagement process for you? So looking deeper into each one of those, and generally what we do is we have the quantitative first of all, and then we follow that up a little bit later on with the qualitative too as well. So either through the focus groups or through the questionnaires that come out. So when we interpret the core results, the questionnaire asks a series of questions, and we apply what's called the traffic light system. So there's a Likert scale in it. And again, this is from a series of comments that are made where you strongly agree with something, do you strongly disagree with something? And within this, then you can then award yourself based on how you're either mostly increased, so you get a green light, so it's something that you keep on doing. If people are mostly neither agreeing nor disagree, so they're in the middle road, it's an amber area, which is an area for improvement. And then it's a red light if it's mostly decreased or greatly decreased. So again, that's an action point. So again, it helps you in terms of something we're doing well, something that there's a potential area for improvement, or the red light areas, I suppose, are ones that we need to be quite concerned about straight away. So it makes it as simple as it possibly can in terms of when you're writing up your assessment afterwards, in terms of what we're doing well and where are the areas that we could improve in. So just to give you a little bit of background in terms of some of the projects that we've been involved with most recently. And for these organisations, the first one there that you have up on the top is Third Age, which is a telephone health support line for older people. STEPS Engineers Ireland is a programme for engineers to go and talk in schools to young people, encouraging them to get involved in the field of engineering, particularly and trying to encourage young females to get involved. DePaul Ireland provides a series of homeless services to people across the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. Our own programme, Event Volunteers, their assessment is there as well. And it was the first programme actually in the Republic of Ireland to get the green light standard, which we were delighted with. And then most recently we've done the Irish Wheelchair Association. One of the things I suppose we've come across all of those, and they've all come out with recommendations. The Third Age Steps, DePaul have gone on to get the Investing in Volunteers Quality Standard, the UK and Ireland wide award. But each one of those reports has helped, I suppose, and if anyone is interested, I can send one of them on to you as a sample, just so you can see sort of the type of data that's in there. But it's helped them, I suppose, to identify what they've done well, where the areas are for improvement within their programs. One of the things that's come out of the DePaul one and the Third Age program was around their training, where they were discovering that the training was excellent that was being provided to volunteers, but volunteers are finding that it was all front loaded. It was quite intense. They had 2-day trainings to go to, and they didn't really understand the role of the volunteer to the full benefit of them being culturally involved in the organisation. And I suppose what was happening was the volunteers were very keen to get started. They wanted to get into the role straight away, but what the organisation was finding was they didn't really understand what the mission was. So if they were working in a homeless organisation, they knew they were helping homeless people, but they possibly didn't understand the full, I suppose, the full magnet of what the organisation wanted them to do, why we do things in a particular way within the organisation. And what those organizations decided to do was to change their training program. So where they were giving the volunteers the training they needed up front in terms of making sure they were skilled, they had all their safeguarding, all their practical training. But after a few weeks' time, they were coming back to explore their vision, mission, value of the organization, where volunteers had the practical experience at that time, and then to explore it further. And what they were finding was that the volunteers were getting more embedded, more feeling comfortable in their roles in terms of understanding why things were done a particular way in the organization. So those are the ones that we've done ourselves. Organizations have done them themselves. And I suppose if you are interested, I would encourage you, I suppose, to get in contact with us. We'd be delighted to talk to you. But one of the things is the large piece of time it does take to write the report and bringing the data together. So if you're going to do it yourself, yes, it takes some time, but I would encourage you to maybe get a volunteer researcher involved in it, and someone that can put the desk work into it to make sure that you get your report completed and turned around in enough time to get back to your volunteers. So in terms of planning for the assessment, I suppose the important pieces are thinking about the sample, how many people you want to get in, you know what's achievable within your organization, the time frame, what's again is suitable, what's a good time of the year to ask the questions. Is it summer? Is it winter? Are people on holidays? Are they likely to respond to an email? Are they more likely to sit down and fill out a paper form? And all of those elements are covered within the pack itself. All right. The key principles, I suppose, are to plan, and that's the really important piece of going. It's a tool that's there. You can very easily take all the questions that are out of it and send them off straight away and encourage people to, to fill out a questionnaire. But it's taking the time to ask the right questions and thinking about, you will and you should act on those things. And the benefits for those organizations are that they've gone on to get investing in volunteers on the basis of this. Be realistic as well of in terms of your time commitment as well, of going, don't be trying to do it when it's your busiest time of the year in terms of recruitment. Give yourself the space to carry it out. And I even myself, in terms of if it's my day job and I'm doing it all the time, it's still just, making sure there's enough room in the program to do that, to make sure that we've got a good outcome at the end. Okay, so that's it. If anyone has any questions, I'd be delighted to answer them. If you've got any questions beyond today, feel free to drop me a tweet or drop me an email, and be delighted to talk to you about it. And I'll hand you back over to Michelle now.
Thanks, Stuart. That was a fabulous outline of that assessment tool. And I do have a question in relation to step 6 in the analysing. Typically, who is doing the assessment, analysing and reporting back?
Well, it's usually the volunteer manager. I suppose if the volunteer manager feels comfortable enough to do that. We have had some organisations that have done it themselves, and then they would come to Volunteer Ireland and say, well, can you give us some more assistance in terms of maybe developing a strategy for the organisation? And that's, I suppose, how we would provide that free of charge to them. Where some of the larger organisations may have a director of volunteering who might be quite a strategic person, and they would be asking those, they'd have the skills themselves to do that. But, that is something that we would, I suppose, actively do is support the organisations and trying to be realistic as well, where some organisations may want to take on a lot and want to change their whole programme completely in, a 6-month time frame, and you're going, slow down, take it easy, and approach it in a sensible manner.
Yeah. So what kind of timeframes do they typically? How long does it take to complete? Typically?
Well, we would say, I suppose, typically, would encourage maybe, in terms of the survey going out, if you're going out with a survey, not to leave it too long, maybe 2 or 3 weeks for the survey to go out. Possibly in advance planning for your focus groups, and depending on how many volunteers you've got or how wide they're spread across the country, allow yourself enough time to get around to those. What we try and do with the survey is, when it comes back in, is to look at the areas that are possibly orange. So the middle ground ones where we need to explore further, because sometimes you might discover that volunteers in one area are having a good experience, and then volunteers in another area are having a not so good experience, and that might be just down to resources or something like that. So that's something we might want to explore a little bit more in a focus group. The report writing, I suppose, how long is a piece of string might be the answer to that, of going, typically it's a week maybe to write the report, and then given how much your phone rings or how many emails you have to answer, we probably found it on one or two occasions we've had students involved from a local community college who did it as part of their work, and they were working full flat out on it, and even for them to write a report up probably took them about 3 or 4 days, just in terms of collating the information. But where we've got the focus groups, I suppose we encourage people is maybe to record them as well, because you're never going to remember everything from them, and it's always good to play them back afterwards, and you hear stuff that people are mentioning, there's a little nugget of information that someone has said about, a positive thing about the program. But a lot of the stuff that comes back is really, really positive. And what organizations have done is use that to promote volunteering within their organizations as well. Of, John here is one of our volunteers and he said X, Y, and Z about our program. So for those that might be worried that, you're going to have, negative or bad feedback about your program, we haven't had that in any, and where we would say some of the organizations that we would work with would have had challenging volunteer management issues in there. Even for them, I suppose it helps people to identify clearly, and that's the good thing of having a research-based tool, is that it clearly helps, I suppose, what are the problems, what are the issues, and how can we get to the root of those.
I did have another question. There was a question from one of our participants asking about what tools can they purchase. I know at the beginning you mentioned that we can purchase the toolkit directly.
Yeah.
But I think the question...
the toolkit's about 40 or 45 pages long. With that, you'll get access to all the online surveys. So the toolkit, although it's called a toolkit, is a booklet, has about 40 pages. So explains, basically takes you through the whole process from start right through to the end, helps you to plan it. And then you get a link online then to all the surveys. So all the surveys for volunteers, for the service users, and the stakeholders, the beneficiaries, that's all available online. So you can download those. If you're using SurveyMonkey or one of those, all you really need to do is cut and paste straight out of the surveys onto it. If you want to hand out the paper-based ones, you can do that yourself. There's absolutely no problem in putting your own logo or anything at all on that at all. They're free to use templates. And again, I'd say if someone's not even thinking of doing the whole volunteer impact assessment, it's a really good thing in terms of getting a set of questions for you to think about. Maybe we just want to do an annual survey, and to take some of those questions out of it, really good in terms of getting some good data on your organisation, your volunteers.
So I want to encourage any participants, if anyone has any questions, pop them up now. But I have a kind of closing question. Oh, here we go. Here's a question. Can you see that one, Stuart?
No, which one?
It's from Chris. She says, "Hi Stuart, who do you identify as the key stakeholders that the report should typically be released to? Would this include funders?"
Yeah, we've encouraged, I suppose, as much as we can to do funders. Our own one quite recently with event volunteers, and I suppose just to give you very quickly, I suppose, is a program that works at festivals and events. And we decided to go to a broad audience. So we went to the local municipalities, the local councils, the event management companies. And it was really, really positive, because the stuff that we got back, we work with these people at events, but apart from we smile and we nod at them, and they're industry people and we're volunteer management people, we don't really get to talk to them. But the feedback we got for them was exceptionally positive. And we really would have never known that if we hadn't done the survey. And I suppose the next time we met them, we had a big smile on our faces. And it wasn't just for the fact that they were filling it out, but they were talking about the impact that we were having on them, making their job easier for them, and how we all worked together. So I would say, you know, as much as you possibly can is get to that broad audience. But again, afterwards with those reports as well is getting them out there in terms of funding, making your case. And there's a free tool that's available too as well. I'll send it on to you afterwards, Michelle, which is Viva, which is the Volunteer Investment Value Audit. And it's a really good tool in terms of looking at the cost of your volunteer program. It's an Excel sheet, but looking, I suppose, at the costs that are there and the impacts that it can make. And that's an add-on tool, but a free part of the volunteer impact assessment. So if anyone wants that, they can either send me an email or I can pop it on to you later on. Yeah.
That would be great, Stuart, if you could send it to me. We can, because at the end of the, once this webinar is completed, we will put it up on our website for people to review and look at again. So at the same time, we can distribute the Viva tool. I'd just like to say, I'll just double check, I don't see any last minute questions, and we've reached the 30-minute time marker. So just like to say a huge thank you to Stuart for taking time out of his, what is 11 o'clock in the evening his time. So thank you very much. That was fabulous presentation. So we're really grateful for your time tonight, and look forward to catching up with you again soon. And a huge shout out, thank you to all the participants who came on and joined us on the journey today. So thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you.
Cool. Right. Farewell, everyone. I'm going to end it now. Bye, Stuart.